Hello and welcome to episode 221 of the Ego Chall podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are covering last week's matches in the CDL, as well as predicting the matches for this week, which will be the final week of the Major 2 qualifiers, which has gone on probably a little bit too long, but we are finally approaching the end and getting closer and closer to Major 2 in England, and finally seeing some land matches again in the CDL. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bank?
Yeah, doing all right. No weekend show this past weekend because you were doing your thing. So we have a double dose of action for today, as opposed to just having the preview for the last week. We got the past weekend's matches to discuss too. So should be a good show. But like I was just saying to you, my mind's already getting a little foggy on those matches. I'm getting too old for this. So we'll see what we can do, but nonetheless, got plenty to talk about, so it should be a good time.
I mean, we've had this kind of schedule for at least a year now that I feel like our brains are just so used to as soon as like Monday hits, it's like, all right, on to the next week. And we're kind of moving past the last week's matches by then. So, yeah, I think we could make it a little more abbreviated than we usually do when we talk about the matches. But who knows with us? That hasn't really worked out super well recently. But we'll start on Friday, March 13th. We had the first match of the weekend was Toronto versus C9. We both thought that Koi would win this match, of course, because C9 had been really struggling basically this entire season, but especially with this new roster. Toronto had looked pretty good, I would say, with Kips in the lineup, and obviously we talked about how Insight had his fantastic match and how he looked like kind of an MVP candidate in one match, and felt like maybe that could go forward. It did not, though. Toronto wins the first map of the series. Then C9 comes back with an S&D and overload win. Toronto forces a game 5, but C9 kind of lending to your point about their S&D prowess, especially with how new this team is and how very little experience these guys at the CDL level, but also together, and how S&D should be kind of the last thing that comes together. But to your point, the C9 wins both of these S&Ds. They win this series, and they really deliver a pretty big blow to Toronto, who had otherwise been solid and looking, maybe trending toward a top 4 seed at Major 2. It could still happen just because of the CDL and how everybody else sucks. But what did you think of C9's upset win here against Toronto?
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about Cloud9 later in the week as well, but a 3-0 showing from them in S&D further builds on what I was saying. Just, it is pretty impressive given the circumstances as you just outlined and everything that seems to be what's come together the quickest for this amateur squad. Um, But the weirdest thing in this series overall was in the overload. The power went out in the Columbus studio. I'm pretty sure Maven and Merc were casting this match. Toronto was up 3-2 in the second half of the overload, and then the power just went out, and we didn't get to see the end of that game. And then all of a sudden, like 20 minutes later, it just pops up on screen. Here's the final scoreboard, and C9 won the map. So we can't even really, even if I did remember this match very well and I watched it, I didn't get to watch like at least the last 4 minutes of the overload here, and nobody really did, so can't really speak too much to what happened in that map in particular. um but I think this was a massive missed opportunity for Toronto. Talked about it on the previous show. They came into this week facing C9 and Vancouver, had a very strong opportunity to get two wins under their belt and improve their seeding heading into the major, which, after the first week of these qualifiers before they brought in Kips, it looked like they could have been one of the teams to miss Major 2. Now they were in a position to get a high seed by picking up two wins later in the qualifiers against two of the lower ranked opponents, and they didn't capitalize on this opportunity. Notably, though, we will. I know for a fact I put in the notes. It's not Toronto related, but we did talk about this um, last week, and so this will be extended to Boston's match, I believe. I'm not looking at the notes right now, but um, for this series against Cloud9, Cloud9 vetoed Den Hardpoint. They vetoed Den Search and Destroy, and Koi vetoed Scar Overload, which means it was C9's pick, and they picked Exposure. So there was no Den in the series, and it's a loss for Toronto. So that has been a big talking point around Toronto, and obviously I think this is a match where regardless of the maps and how strong Koi have looked on Den, they should be able to beat the C9 team, but credit to C9 for picking up another victory. It does seem like it at the end of the day isn't going to mean much because it doesn't seem like they're going to be at Major 2, but still good experience for these guys, and in particular, I'm happy to see them doing well in Search and Destroy. So shout out to the C9 boys for picking up a win. Definitely a disappointing showing to start the week for Toronto, though.
Rickus Morty's back in the YouTube chat said, "God, could you imagine being a Browns fan?" I could not. I don't know who you're even referring to at this point. But yeah, C9. I think it's incredible that they've been able to pull off multiple wins. We were talking just a few weeks ago how this is pretty similar to the Las Vegas Falcons from last year, and how who knows if they'll ever win a CDL match. And now they've not only won one, but they've won two. And I would say two teams that are not like bottom of the barrel. Of course, Toronto and Paris in their current form have struggled, and they do look very vulnerable, but you could say that about all 11 teams outside of OpTic. So I think that they deserve a lot of credit, and the S&D point that you brought up weeks ago is, I think it's kind of awesome to see, because we always say S&D wins championships, but if you're able to find that kind of consistency early, even teams that have been around a long time, they struggle with S&D because it all comes down to communication and timing, and it really does take an incredible amount of teamwork. So for C9 to pull off these wins the way they have, they definitely deserve a ton of credit for that. Morty said, I still believe in Kips for Koi. I think they just need time. And JJ Woody said that match, maybe some bread. I think you just have to keep it going with Kips on Koi. I still don't think that Insight is a long-term solution. I think that they're going to have to make a move at some point, if there is a move to be made, which is probably the bigger question out there. But yeah, they've been relatively decent for these Major 2 qualifiers with him in the lineup.
Oh yeah.
I think they're going to struggle against top teams. They were struggling before. They were going to struggle with him. I don't think that he's a game changer in that regard, because if he was, then he's kind of like a MVP caliber player. If he's able to come in and, like Neptune last year, change the trajectory of this team. They just have more issues than just that position that he replaced Real in. So they're gonna have to work out some things, and I guess it really depend on how well they perform at Major 2. The online qualifiers are one thing, but if they kind of fall flat in Major 2, then you might see more changes coming from Toronto down the pike.
No, and I still have been really impressed with Kips, and I mean he did have a 1.05 KD in this series, and he actually, it was a Neslo out of Cloud9 here, so this isn't the most surprising thing, but he had 89 kills, which was second to Joe's 106, which shout out Joe to Thieves for 1.45 KD in the series, but Kips had 89 kills, second most on Toronto. That was more than Encourage, who had 87, and the most for Cloud9, which again, obviously isn't the most surprising given the fact that it was a Neslo and Toronto won both hard points, but I've still been really impressed with Kips overall.
Eve said, Insight peaked in Cold War. Morty said, I don't think Falcons are selling QK. Who are Koi going to bring in that's an actual upgrade for Insight right now? JJ said, I was hoping they dropped Insight or CLINCHES instead of Real. And then Morty said, I feel like Koi missed their window to replace Insight. I still think that Nasty is... I don't know how realistic it is, but Boston is certainly not a contender by any means, and we'll see if they make it to Major 2. That could be a determining factor for how things go from there, but I think that is an option. It just feels like that is an opening for Toronto, and he actually might fit in pretty well with Toronto. But we talked about it before, like the AR players, they're really, whatever the opposite of a dime a dozen is, like they are quite literally so rare, at least impactful ARs. that they can bring in that will fit with this roster. Because even if you look at Real coming in, I think we both thought that that would work out really well. And then, we thought maybe even the role issues wouldn't mean as much just because there's so much talent on the team. And that was completely wrong. The role issues dominated the actual talent, and that the talent didn't really mean anything because you had players really kind of uncomfortable with the way that they were playing. And we saw it with, I guess we could just bring it up, like Real officially got released by Toronto this past week, and the owner of the team just flat out said, like, we thought that the roles would kind of work out and the role swap would work out, and it didn't. And now we're here, and Real is a free agent as a result of that. So they it's really hard to say. Like, even if you were to place Nasty from Boston into Toronto, maybe because he has a different role within Boston, maybe it wouldn't work the same way within Koi, who obviously I think has like a much higher ceiling than the Breach do. So there are just a lot of ifs, ands, and buts, and it's kind of difficult to predict the future. But I do think that Koi should have some options. It's just who knows how well those options will actually pan out as we move forward.
Yeah, and YouTube chat bringing up you know, potentially considering dropping Kleenex or Insight instead of Real, and I might not be the number one Kleenex supporter in the world. I'd assume some of his family members and loved ones would be slightly ahead of me, just
Yeah.
slightly, but definitely would not advocate for dropping Kleenex, and I do think he has played better since Real left the team and he's been moved back from the flex to the full SMG. I do think if Toronto was to make another move, Insight would naturally be like just next on the chopping block. But I do agree, I'm not entirely sure uh, what sort of player they would look to bring in, and who could actually be a super impact player to bring in at this point in the season. So that would be interesting to see how it all played out. But in terms of the Real thing that you mentioned too, I did think it was interesting that Real is officially an unrestricted free agent, and there was some speculation about Abe uh, like replacing Real as the quote unquote substitute for this team, just because there was some chatter earlier this year in terms of remember Abe was on
Mm-hmm.
Toronto at the end of last year for EWC, and there was some, I don't know if it was ever officially confirmed or anything like that, but I think there was reports and rumors that Abe was still under contract with Toronto and loaned to Vancouver for the start of this year, so he
Mm-hmm.
technically could still be under contract with Toronto, and that just from a business standpoint makes sense to just plug him in as the substitute as they cut ties with Real. So I don't think that means anything in terms of potentially Abe getting a shot with Toronto. Maybe it happens if they make multiple changes, but I wouldn't, for example, expect like Abe to be the first on the list to come in for Insight if they were to make a change for Insight. So I did think that was worth bringing up.
Morty said, I think Boston drops Purge and picks up Real before they sell Nasty, in my opinion. Yeah, I don't know if it's super likely that Boston actually makes that move. I would just say if you're
Ooh.
Toronto, then you have to kind of push for it. Like, hey, are you thinking about it? Like, if you're even remotely thinking about it, let us know. Maybe we can work out something.
I do. We talked about when it was rumored that Snoopy might go to Miami before Trakes in the offseason, that Real and Snoopy together would be an interesting sub duo. I was admittedly very excited to see Joe and Real working together, even though I thought it would have been better for Real and Kleenex, but obviously Joe was always going to be still on an SMG. But I was excited for that SMG duo in some fashion with Real, and it didn't work out. But I do think Snoopy and Real would be interesting to see if that works out. It's just that comes down to a question of, is Boston going to spend money to make a roster move at this point?
Yeah, we'll see with that. You mentioned Miami just a little bit ago. Obviously Snoopy, there was a chance that he could have went to the Heretics, and of course Trakes ended up there. And I guess until maybe 3 weeks ago, they had been really hit or miss. We talked about it, how all of their wins up until about 3 weeks ago were against the bottom tier teams, like the bottom 3 or 4 teams in the league, and they were kind of farming those wins. That's no longer the case anymore, and they are actually on the second longest winning streak in the CDL after this week, only behind OpTic, of course. But Miami have now won 5 straight. We'll just loop in both of their matches because they're relatively similar. On Friday, they played the Riyadh Falcons, and they win that 3-0. Very tight series overall. The overload was pretty decisive, but it was a 250 to 233 hard point, a round 11 S&D win for Miami. And then later in the week on Sunday, they played Vancouver. That was more decisive, more kind of handedly. It was 250-199 hard point win, 6-2 S&D, and 5-2 overload win for Miami. So 6 straight map wins for the Heretics here. They, again, like I said, 5 straight match wins. They haven't lost since February 28th, so they're undefeated in March. And 4 of their 5 wins have been sweeps. They 3-0'd Cloud9, 3-0'd G2 Minnesota. They beat LAT 3-2, and then 3-0'd Falcons and Vancouver this past week. So what did you think of the Heretics? And what, I guess, how do you feel about the Heretics now versus how you did maybe 3-4 weeks ago?
I mean, I was pretty high on them coming into this week before we actually saw them in action because I picked Miami to win this matchup, and I think we talked about it in our pick'em episode towards the end there. Like, but I wasn't entirely confident with either squad going into this game, and we'll get to Falcons a little bit later, but I just felt from a matchup perspective, I was expecting Miami to take this, and the maps were pretty close outside of the overload. I think the biggest difference for me, at least for Miami, has just been Trakes, and honestly, I feel like a bit of a broken record at this point because I feel like I've been saying this um recently, like over the past few weeks, but like Trakes' rookie of the year campaign is in full swing at this point in my eyes. He
Yeah.
had 1.32 KD in this series, led the way for Miami, and really him and Super have just been putting on a show of late, and I've really been impressed with the way Trakes has played, and I think that's been the biggest thing for Miami in recent years. No matter what player they plug in or who it is, it feels like they always they find these guys, they plug them into the roster, and it might not always yield immediate success, but slowly but surely they build up the chemistry, they get the reps together, and they start to turn things around and look like a true high caliber team. And I'm not gonna, you know, say anything outlandish. Like I think Miami could beat OpTic at Major 2. I mean, maybe you could make the argument that they have the best shot of anybody just based on how dominant OpTic has been, and maybe Miami possibly being the second closest team in terms of recent performances. But that's like you could definitely argue either way in that. Regardless, I have been impressed by Miami overall, and I am excited to see Trace's continued development this season because it just feels like as he's getting more reps, he's just getting better.
Yeah, I think this was the Miami team that we thought we might get at the beginning of the season, and that just wasn't the case. They came out super flat, maybe because Trakes took a while to get into the country, and so they could practice super consistently. Or maybe it just takes a while to get that chemistry built up, and they dealt with some, the bumps in the road that a lot of teams do when they come together first, and they didn't get the honeymoon period, which is unfortunate, but that affected their major 1. But it certainly doesn't seem like it's affecting their major 2 qualifiers too much. They last lost to Toronto. I think they lost 3 straight, maybe 3 out of the last 4 before this win streak. So they were kind of at a pretty bad low at that point, and then they've just been able to win a bunch of matches. Again, if you want to be if you want to be critical of them, you could say look at who they've beaten. There's a lot of teams there that aren't super competitive, LAT being probably the only one that you could actually be like that's a decent or good team. But we'll talk about it with LAT. They have their struggles as well. So there are no like flawless teams really except OpTic in these qualifiers. But Miami is proven able over the last 3 weeks to be able to win matches, and that isn't something that a lot of these other teams in the CDL can actually say for themselves. Morty said in the YouTube chat, Miami's S&D isn't good, even with Super going crazy on the sniper. If they want to beat a team like OpTic, their S&D has to be better. And then he said it's crazy because OpTic is so good in every game mode, FaZe, Cold War level, that it's an uphill battle for every team right now. Yeah, I think that's totally true. It's just I think with anything with OpTic, it is like it's great until it's not, and then it's not great until it is, and that's just kind of how they go. Like there isn't really a middle ground often with them. It is either they are the best or they have suddenly forgot how to play Call of Duty and use a controller. So it's there are some things there, but I definitely agree that at least in these qualifiers, they've looked pretty much unbeatable. And I don't think Miami, I put Miami contenders now. I mean, they certainly could make it to the grand finals, which is not something that I think either one of us really expected a month ago with how they were playing, but they certainly seem like contenders in that regard. They're maybe not contending for a championship, but they are contending for a spot in the Major 2 grand finals at this point.
At least right now, the according to Breaking Point, the records per mode for Miami: 16-13 in Hardpoint, 10-9 in Overload, 15-9 in Search and Destroy. So, I mean, I'd have to look at every team's record in Search and Destroy, but 15-9 obviously is their best win percentage so far. And we've talked a lot about Miami like last season once they brought Super into the roster, just how much that changed their S&D. So I still expect them, given the fact that still acclimating to playing with Trakes and S&D and all that, I do expect them in the long run to be a solid S&D team.
Yeah, I think that they should feel pretty good. I'm looking it up on Breaking Point. They have the second highest S&D win percentage this year, only behind OpTic. I mean, Carolina has the third, which is just that's funny. So yeah, OpTic has won. I don't know how updated these are, if they are including this week's matches, but
Yeah.
OpTic 68%, Miami 63%, Carolina 57%. I mean, and we talked about it last year, like you said, Miami. That's kind of how they were winning a lot of their matches. Was they just started winning their S&Ds, which wasn't something that could always be said. They finished with the fourth highest S&D win percentage last year behind FaZe, LAT, and Carolina. So, yeah, I think it's interesting. They don't have to be like the thing is with a lot of these teams is like they don't have to be lights out in a game mode. They just have to be better in that game mode than the other teams, or more consistent in that game mode than the other teams. And right now they're certainly the most consistent. They're the second most consistent team in the league, and I think that can really help them pick up a lot of wins, like as they have done the last few weeks. So they're five match win streak. I think OpTic has a 9 match win streak because they would have lost the grand finals. So congrats to Miami. I hope this continues because my preseason predictions were pretty off for the first, I don't know, like 2 months of the season because they just couldn't get it together. Next up, though, we had OpTic versus Paris Genomates on Friday. We talked about it before coming in that OpTic just said flat out, hey, we're going to be experimenting with some things. Who knows how everything is going to go. They end up winning the series despite that. But it was about as close as it could get, especially in the S&Ds, both of which go to round 11. The first one, Raid S&D, that one goes to Paris, and then Scar S&D in Game 5 is a 6-5 win for OpTic. OpTic, they win both hard points. Paris wins that first S&D in the Overload. And really, this is a lot bigger for Paris. This is a bigger loss for Paris than as a big win for OpTic because OpTic, they really had basically everything had to go wrong for them. And for those second place teams, everything had to go right for them for that number one seed not to be OpTic's at the end of these qualifiers. And with this win, OpTic clinched the number one seed at the Major 1 qualifiers. And for Paris, it continued a losing streak where, we talked about it. They very much looked at risk and still, even after this week, are still at risk of missing Major 2. What did you think of this match between OpTic and the Genomates?
I thought overall I was impressed by Gentlemates in terms of how competitive this series was, given the performances we've seen from both teams in recent weeks. I thought it would have been very easy for OpTic to just 3-0 20-minute DoorDash this series if Paris had played as they played in their previous few matches, but um, knowing the opponent on the other side, it seemed pretty apparent to me that General Mates came out with a little extra fire and motivation to try and get something done here in this matchup. I did, as you mentioned, I did think it was interesting that we didn't see some of those maps that JP mentioned, but it is worth mentioning as well that Blackheart Hardpoint was vetoed by Gentlemates, so it's not like it was OpTic avoiding playing that map after saying they were going to try. Like they just couldn't play it. So um, that is something that did stand out to me. But in both S&Ds, map 2, Gentlemates had a 5-2 lead. In the map 5, Gentlemates had a 5-3 lead, and it went around 11 like you said, but it was just one instance Gentlemates actually choked a 5-3 lead, and then the other one they almost choked a 5-2 lead. Merc had, I didn't clip it here, but he had like a nutty uh, 1v3 attempt. I think it was in this match where like he was trying to shoot the pistol through the smoke, and it seemed like the aim assist because of the smoke might have been off a little bit, and he wasn't able to uh, complete that what would have been an absurd clutch. But nonetheless, I think everyone was expecting OpTic to win this match. I don't think many people were expecting the match to be as close as it was, given the way Gentlemates had played of late, but I do think that's a good sign for Gentlemates going into what we've outlined multiple times now as a crucial stretch for them in these qualifiers if they want to be at Major 2, which is still just unfathomable to me. Um, but I did think I put in the notes too that there was a listen in map 1 despite the score. I thought Gentlemates like sounded good in the comms and had a little bit of that extra passion I was mentioning in terms of um, wanting to just have the passion to try and fix what has been going wrong. And we've heard now, and the Sib has tweeted multiple times over the last
Yeah.
week of just what's been going on. Neptune apparently had a death in the family, so hoping things are good for Nep there. Um, but outside of that, and just strictly what we saw in the game, I definitely did think this series was closer than probably many people anticipated. And despite the chokes and the lead slipping in the S&D for Gentlemates, they still, I mean, the fact this goes game 5, round 11 when Envoy's dropping a .69 KD, that's a little interesting as well. Shotzi also went 91 and 92, so he was technically -1 in this series. But Neptune has, or sorry, not Neptune, Envoy has definitely been struggling statistically of late. We've outlined that. So that we're just going to have to continue to keep an eye on that. But overall, a very close series that might not have been as close if Gentlemates played the way they were playing previously leading up to this match.
Yeah, So's tweet. I mean the second one is whatever, but the first one was Envoy sucks, Envoy's ass in quotation marks. He said he's the most accoladed, accomplished on the team. It's like, dude, I even defending him is like that is like kind of a shot across the bow. Like you don't need to be quoting like Envoy sucks, Envoy's ass when you're trying to defend him. And then the other one was they think we're compromised, have a few bad games and count you out and happy on your downfall. I mean, like you guys have been like awful like for the last like 3 weeks. You guys lost to Cloud9 New York, and granted, we just saw Cloud9 win another match, but like you guys were the first team against this version of C9 to lose. I think you're very open to, you should be open to the criticism because it is well warranted. This is not like OpTic loses. If OpTic lost this match, we're talking about like, oh man, they really suck. Like they're not contenders anymore. Like no, if OpTic, like they did in the Major 1 qualifiers, start to lose all of their matches, we rightfully are like, what the hell is wrong with OpTic? Why aren't they winning? And if you're gonna be like OpTic and you're gonna rebound at the next Major and go to the winners finals or the grand finals or whatever, then okay. But like until then, we can't do anything about that. So I'm gonna just ban Morty's out of the YouTube chat if he keeps talking shit. Again, I don't think losing to C9 is like losing the Browns. I think it's like, if you lost to, I don't know, the Paris Legion or something, or the the Falcons or something like that. I don't really know. But yeah, obviously Paris loses another one. OpTic, they clinch the number one seed at the major too. Regardless of what happens this next week, I should say, the worst that they can finish is 9-2. The best that I believe Miami can finish is 8-3, and they're in second place. So OpTic's good. We might see even more experimentation in their map pool if the other teams will let them. But we've seen
Yeah.
like Blackheart is probably the most vetoed map across the league by every team. So I don't know if a lot of teams are going to be willing to even risk it playing OpTic. Saturday, March 14th, Carolina versus G2. I don't know what the hell happened. I don't know what to do with G2 just in general. This is a 3-0 sweep for the Ravens. Pretty close, very close hard point, 6-4 S&D, and then 6-2 overload. Like G2 have proven super unreliable, that they can beat some of the top teams, but they also lose to teams that they certainly shouldn't lose to. What did you think of this one?
I really don't have much to say on this one. I was super stunned in the moment and still just sitting here trying to think of something to say in terms of like what happened for G2. I really don't have a good answer here, and I think you summed it up. Like it's uh pretty weird to be hearing like, G2's losing to Carolina, but they've pretty consistently shown up against FaZe, and it's just I don't know. I honestly I feel pretty stupid sitting here trying to think of something good to say, and I'm just at a loss for words. I do think, at least on the Carolina front, and I think even in the FaZe matchup as well, Lurks played very well in this series and against FaZe later in the weekend, which we'll get to. But um, this is another, like, if you look at the stat sheet, I think it was, I mean, the G2 matches all blend together at this point, but I know I've illustrated this example before. Um, this series here, Estriel has a 1.14 KD. Everyone else on G2 has below a point 0.9. And there have been other series this year where the other three guys on G2 all have a positive KD, and Estriel has a negative KD, and they win. It's just a lack of consistency, and I think that's probably uh, the best way of looking at this for Cloud9, right? Or wow, Cloud9, geez, for G2 right now. The best way to look at it is just I am in a position where I don't really know what to expect from them, and if they aren't consistently showing up statistically or consistently having strong performances regardless of the opponent on the other side, that makes it tougher for us to consistently have, stuff to talk about them for. So that's the way I'm just going to choose to look at it at this point. And I feel like I'm babbling and saying nonsense too, so I'm just going to shut up.
No, like if you look at G2, they have this series on Saturday, and then they go on Sunday. They play the first match of that day, and then they really are like scratching and clawing to get by the Boston Breach. Like this is very easily could have been a 3-0 sweep for Boston. It ends up being a 3-1 win for G2, but it's a 250 to 244 hard point. Boston wins the 6-4 S&D. It goes to overtime, and G2 wins 2-1 overload. And then the last hard point is just Boston kind of just spinning a wheel and be like, yep, sounds good to me. Like, I definitely want to play Crimplossus against Crimp, but they get smoked on that map. But honestly, it might, like in an alternate universe and very close to ours, this might not even gone to Colossus hardpoint, and it might not even mattered. G2 just didn't play well this week, and they haven't played real well for a few weeks now. They obviously lost to Miami pretty recently, and did not look very good in that series. I really don't know. I don't know if this is just they're able to be competitive with teams, or if it's more just like maybe teams play down to them, or they play up to the competition and then they play down to other competition. I'm not entirely sure what to make of them, but yeah, G2, they go 1-1 this week, which is probably not good, because they should go 2-0 in a week like this, especially if they want to kind of move out of just that like middle tier in the CDL and go to kind of where Miami is trending right now, where they're like, okay, maybe we could actually compete and get to a championship Sunday. That's very open for G2. Like they can do that, but it just isn't clicking for whatever reason. So, any thoughts on the G2 Boston kind of? I don't know. It's a kind of a clusterfuck, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, this was the match I was alluding to earlier in the week when we were talking about Toronto Cloud9, and the Den situation is you know Boston just plays Colossus against G2, and it really doesn't make a ton of sense to me given the position both teams are in. If you look at the stats, it is Colossus is Boston's most picked hardpoint map at 11. It is the map they have the most wins at, but they're 6-5 on Colossus, and then next highest they're 3-2 on Exposure and 3-4 on Scar. Those are the only hardpoint maps they have win on. Well, this is actually crazy. Boston's 0-6 on Den and 0-4 on hardpoint. So they're 0-4 on Blackheart. So maybe it is being a little overcritical of them, where they're like in a position where they don't have another good pick to throw in here as opposed to Colossus. But this just goes back to what I was saying in the previous week where they played Den. I think it was Den Overload against Toronto after Toronto like got smoked on Scar Overload, and then they played Den Overload and Boston got smoked by Toronto like 8-0 or something crazy. So um I guess, further looking at the numbers, it might not be as big of a deal, but this is two times in recent weeks now where it just feels like it's like, well, what's going on here with Boston? Why are we picking these maps against these particular teams? Um, I guess I'll just give them the benefit of the doubt here, and after looking at the numbers a little further and seeing like Colossus technically is their best hardpoint map, and it just happens to be uh, G2's obvious best hardpoint map as well. So maybe it's just like, they got to roll with it. But it is strange to me that this has happened twice now in multiple weeks, in back-to-back weeks, where it seemingly, at least on paper, Boston is being willing to play these matchups against teams that are considered to be very solid on these particular maps, and Boston is just like, yeah, we'll just play it, screw it. So um not sure really much else to think about. It might be being a little overcritical, but it definitely jumped out to me in the moment, and in the heat of the moment when the match was going on, and especially in hindsight, seeing how dominant G2 looked on Kremplossus again here. It's like that really adds further fuel to it. Like, what the hell are we doing? But a couple days removed from it now, and me looking at the numbers here, I guess I can see a little bit of the logic, but it is still something that sticks out to me.
Yeah, it might not be the decision making really that is the problem. It's just that they're so limited that they have no real second option. Like if you go to Blackheart, like you said, they're playing on a map that they haven't won on. I believe that Minnesota's best maps in Hardpoint are Colossus and Den. They're 7-3 now, I guess, on Colossus, and 5-1 on Den. They were 3-6 on Scar, 2-2 on Blackheart. So like they definitely didn't want to play Scar in the series if they could get away with it. Obviously, they're able to win Den as they have for most of these. So yeah, it's kind of really the decision making isn't the part to criticize. It's just that they don't really have any other option in this, and that they're kind of forced to play this. And then it really goes back to the point, like if they had closed out some of these previous maps, the respawns and map 1 and 2, or map 1s and 3, then yeah, like this wouldn't have went to game 4. They wouldn't have had to deal with Colossus, and we would be talking completely different about G2 because they would have lost and been kind of on the chopping block as we enter the last week of the Major 2 qualifiers. But for Boston, it's kind of like like we'll talk about their first match of the week pretty shortly, but this is a huge loss for them. Like they could have gotten out of the that 11th spot probably if they had won one of these matches, and now they're going into last week and they need something to happen. They don't control their own destiny, and that's always a pretty dicey situation to be put in. Next up was Toronto versus Vancouver on Saturday. We talked about Toronto and their first match of the league, losing to C9. Somehow they beat Vancouver after losing to Cloud9, but this was a pretty competitive series, all things considered. Vancouver ends up winning the S&D 6-4 and nearly win that second hard point, but Toronto closes out the series 250-235 on Scar to win 3-1. This would have been a disaster, like straight up, if Toronto went 0-2 against these two teams. Fortunately, that doesn't happen. Did you feel any better about Toronto after this series, or was it another one where you're like, oh Jesus, like this is a little too close to call?
I just think, I put it in the notes, but I said they were all close maps, but Joe was the MVP diff, and that's really what it comes down to here, in my opinion. Like, Joe just fried all weekend, but really in particular, he was the difference maker here. 121 kills. Nobody else. Kips was the next closest at 98. Cap had 96 for the most for Vancouver. So just a true all-star caliber performance out of Joe Deceives. Kips played really well too, though. So like that's just been the lethal duo for Toronto. And like I said earlier, just been impressed with Kips all around. He had 13 in the search and destroy, which was the loss for Toronto in this series, but still a solid performance from him there. Just once again, this time taking it a step further from what Cloud9 did. Surge banned, then Hardpoint, then Search, and then Overload. So Cloud9 banned, then Hardpoint, then Search, and then left up the Overload and just didn't pick it. In this case, Surge just bans all three dens and doesn't even give Toronto an opportunity to play it. So it does look like teams are catching on to that, despite what happened with Boston and Toronto last week. Um, and I think at the end of the day, these were pretty close maps, and I do think Capital has had a pretty solid impact on Vancouver just in their competitiveness, and like I think I outlined it last week when we were talking about his first matchups. He's not like jumping off the stat sheet, but it's kind of like he's just having a ton of engagements. He went 30 and 20 in the Overload, 35 and 35 in the map 4, so that's just 70 engagements there. Joe was 43 and 32, so he's at 75. So like, obviously just a few kills go the other way, and he's more in line with Joe in that sense. But um, just overall for Vancouver, it seems like they might have been a little late pulling the trigger on a roster move, but I do think this, like you said, this would have been a disaster if Toronto wasn't able to win this matchup. So it was a very important win for them. I do think I want to see a little bit more out of this Vancouver squad with Capsidal, though, in terms of how they can potentially turn things around. I'm not super optimistic, but I have been pretty vocal about, you know, liking what I've seen out of Lunars since the major, and I do think Cap is still a solid player. So I guess we'll have to see if Vancouver is able to make anything happen. But overall, from Toronto perspective, a much needed victory here that was probably a little sweatier than they expected, but in the end, Joe All-Star MVP caliber performance pushes them across the finish line.
Yeah, Vancouver really just needs to get to Major Two. Whatever seed they get, it doesn't really matter. But they just need to make sure that they get a few land matches under their belt with Cap on this team. Because if they were to finish 11th or 12th, then they don't go. And I feel like that's just like a really big missed opportunity to kind of get some chemistry going and just see what you have in a land environment. But they're, I guess, in the driver's seat or in a driver's seat to not do that. So hopefully that works out for them. But yeah, this wasn't great. They lost this. This was a pretty winnable series, especially with how Toronto has been looking. So I bet they look back on this series and think like, damn, that one kind of got away from us. Next up though, we had LAT versus C9. I don't know, like this is a weird series just in general because the hard points were about as dominant as you could possibly get. As a 100-point club in map 1, 250-95 for LAT. The second hard point was nearly a 100-point club, 250 to 108. C9 again wins the S&D, so S&D is kind of their bread and butter, which is pretty good. It's just that you have to get to the map 5s to really make that come home. But that didn't happen here. They win that S&D, but then they lose the overload and then both hard points in this series. LAT wins 3-1. A good win for them just to not continue losing, but we'll obviously talk about what happens later in the weekend. What did you think of LAT here and how they were able to kind of move past some of the S&D issues?
Well, LAT didn't move past
Or yeah,
S&D
exactly. I guess
issues.
overcome their S&D issues.
um, that from Cloud9 perspective, like I said earlier, 3-0 in S&D on the week for them. That out, even if they didn't win the Toronto match, obviously if you're 3-0 in search, you have to win uh, one series because that means you played at least one game 5. But regardless, I mean that's just something that C9 will have to continue to build on. Presumably, even if they don't make it to Major 2, they will probably stick with this roster, I would assume at least. Given the financial stuff we've heard, it just makes sense from a business perspective if they just ride it out with this roster. And if they're continuing to build, if they keep playing like this in search and can just continue to build on the other stuff, uh, they might be able to keep causing some upsets here and there this season. But expected result, especially in the hard points, with 100-point club map 1 and a near 100-point club in map 4. I put it down in the notes, like where I was writing out the stats, but like, you know, map 1 really was a perfect example of what I've been saying about this LAT team. Abizi 30 and 23, Hydra 28 and 23, Scrap 22 and 20 or 26 and 22, and Neum just has to exist and not giga feed. And I put it down in the notes, didn't even put his stats down. I absolutely loved his comms and them listening, just like sounded like a seasoned vet when he's literally the rookie on this team playing with three uh superstar players. And that's the recipe for success for this LAT team. That's what I've been saying, and what I'm going to continue to stress with this team is if those other three guys, Abizi, Hydra, and Scrap, are playing as the all-star MVP caliber players that we know they can be, Neum just has to bring the comms, do his role, and that should be a recipe for success for LAT. It was in the last week, I believe, where it felt like Neum was literally the only guy going positive for LAT, and they were getting smoked. And like that's just not going to be the recipe for success for them. If he can bring the comms and even in some sort of sense, it just seems weird to say what I'm about to say. If he just becomes that vocal leader for a team as the
Yeah.
rookie, like that seems weird to say, but like he literally like that seems like that's what they just need in this sense. If the other three guys are playing the way that we know they all are capable of playing, he just got to sit back, bring the comms, bring the good vibes, and good things could, in theory, happen for the squad. It just, we'll get to the other match later, but I in my head now, I can't remember exactly what from the listen-in stood out to me, but I remember in the moment that's what I was thinking was just like, this is what a LAT hardpoint should look like from an overall perspective, even if it is against Cloud9. Still take it with a grain of salt, but I'd still think that's what we got to see from LAT if they're going to be successful against anyone.
Yeah, let's just bring in their second match though, because that one is like, I mean, Neum did not play well. That's for sure. Like he statistically had a .82 KD in the series, but it's not like he was dragging the team down necessarily. It was this team was kind of dragging all of each other down because
Yep.
if you look at map 1, Hydra has an incredible map, 39 and 30. Everybody else has a negative KD. Scrap is on the edge. He's 30 and 31, but Abizi and Neum both 23, 21 kills. Neum actually has like a decent S&D map, but they still lose that one. And then the control, Abizi goes
Control.
positive, or sorry, overload. Abizi goes positive. Everybody else goes negative, and they lose that map as well. So they get swept by the Falcons, who themselves got swept earlier in the weekend by the Miami Heretics, who just a few weeks ago beat LAT 3-2. So I don't really know what to make of that. Obviously that would say that Miami is better than both the Falcons and LAT, and that LAT is worse than both the Falcons and Miami. That's not a good place for Miami or for LAT to be in, especially because we talked about it. The reason that the Kenny roster change was so needed was because they weren't competitive with the top teams in the league, and they were losing to teams that they shouldn't lose to. They were losing to those middle tier teams as well, and that kind of seems like it's happening again. It doesn't seem like they're super competitive with the top teams. They've had decently back and forth series with OpTic or FaZe or whoever, but they've lost most of those. And then they're losing to the teams that the Falcons for sure have not looked like a top team. They had that few week stretch in the Major 1 qualifiers, but they didn't show that at Major 1. Major 2 qualifiers have been kind of more of the same. They just haven't looked super good. Miami, maybe they're turning a corner, but we haven't seen them against the top teams, so it's hard to really judge. But otherwise, they haven't played and beaten top teams. So LAT just seems like they're kind of back where they started before the Kenny change. What do you see from LAT? How big of a worry is something like this Falcons series, and losing this? How big of a concern is that to you?
Um, I don't know. I think it just overall just has me questioning where LAT would be ranked in a hierarchy. I think that's an overall issue for the entire league at this point outside of OpTic right now. Like we kind of joked about it. I don't know if it was last episode, maybe it was two ago. How like power rankings right now would be OpTic S tier and then like 10 teams in the B tier, skipping the A tier, and then Cloud9 below them. But now, even with Cloud9 beating Toronto and winning a search against LAT, maybe it's literally the power rankings is OpTic S tier and then 11 teams in the C tier. I don't
Yeah,
really know.
maybe.
Um, but overall, I just think this. Like you mentioned looking at the numbers and stuff for LAT here, if all four guys on LAT are negative in a series, it shouldn't matter who they're playing against. Even if
Mm-hmm.
this was the stat sheet against Cloud9, they're going to lose that series too. And that just full circle with what I was saying in the Cloud9 series. Like, obviously, Neum doesn't have a great performance, but it's not like a BZ isn't too far ahead of him or anything like that. Not to point fingers, but like if everybody on the team is going negative, that's not the recipe for success. I was just outlining where you have those guys all clicking, and I understand there are going to be matches where people have off games, and you can't always rely on Hydra, Scrap, and BZ to play at that all star level at the same time, but somebody you would think would be when you have this collection of talent, you would think somebody would at least step up in these matches, and it'd be like sort of like the my Minnesota match earlier where we were saying where like Estriel played well and then the other three guys had a stinker. Like I would have expected to at least see that in this matchup, not see all four guys with a negative stat sheet against Falcons. You did mention Hydra's map one there, which that was a super banger towards the end, and he had an unfortunate kill streak, unfortunate team kill with a Hellstorm where he killed someone on Falcons and Scrap out of the hill, and then just nobody on LAT was able to get back in the hill to contest, and Falcons were able to get the last second win. But Hydra did play well in that map one, 39 and 30. Um, it's just pretty close maps overall. I'd say obviously 6-3 in the search is a 6-3, but 6 points in a hard point, and then an overtime that came down to kills and the overload, like pretty close series all things considered. And I think I said it last episode. I don't know exactly how I said it, but I said this was one that I was picking LAT, but I wouldn't have been surprised if Falcons came out and got a win, and that is what happened. I can't even remember what I was thinking exactly at that time, but um, I wouldn't be surprised too if this is a matchup that kind of is a little reminiscent of the Carolina LAT saga in the Major 1 cycle there, where like Carolina gets the win against LAT online and they face off on LAN and LAT gets the win. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if these two teams played on LAN and LAT came out on top this time. I just think this is a bit of a head scratcher, but good on the Falcons for capitalizing and getting a win. I think I saw something too that Celium now with this win, he beat all of his FaZe teammates in this cycle of qualifiers after losing to all of his teammates in the previous qualifiers. So I thought that was interesting, but yeah, overall, I mean, Yeah, on that note too, didn't even really like register for me. Sell at a 1.3 KD in this series, like that's MVP sell right there. So um, maybe we, instead of harping on LAT struggles, got to give a little more credit to Falcons for them showing up and taking care of business, regardless of how LAT were playing.
Yeah, I think Falcons. That's the issue has been that like we don't see it all the time. Like we didn't see it
Yeah,
against Miami, but then we see it against LAT, who I think LAT would probably be considered by most to be a more talented team, even if they're obviously going through a much rougher stretch than Miami is at this point. But yeah, it's you know the reason that I could see you picking Falcons over LAT or anybody picking Falcons over LAT is that Falcons are in a position to actually match talent for talent. Like Celium and Scrap are not too different of players. Exnid is playing pretty well. So if you want to say that he's on par with Abizi or whatever, like I could see that. They obviously just have a ton of talent with Pred, and if Kismet is your quote unquote worst player, then I think that you're probably going to be a pretty good team, all things considered, and especially if he's playing out of role. So they have a good chance of matching talent with the Falcons. Same with OpTic, same with FaZe, and teams that we consider to be kind of like the upper echelon. Same with Paris. That's why it's kind of frustrating with the Falcons is that they don't always show that, and that's really the position that we are in with LAT as well. That they have all this talent, and you laid it out. Like if Neum is able to just kind of be kind of an even Steven player, he doesn't have to do too much, but he just kind of has to be kind of a cog in the machine. They should be good. Well, when the rest of the machine is just breaking around you, that little cog doesn't really matter at all. And that feels like what's happening with LAT is that there are just a lot of kind of tainted parts to this team, and I don't know how you fix that. I guess we'll see at Major 2 if they're able to turn it around. And like you said, maybe they beat Falcons early on and we say, oh, okay, it was just an online match or whatever. But if you remember what happened at Major 1, yeah, they beat Carolina and then they just kind of laid an egg for the rest of the tournament. So it wasn't like they went on a run like a la OpTic or Paris or any of those teams. They weren't really close to any of them. So hopefully they're able to figure it out. This was a pretty bad way to end the penultimate week of qualifiers, but they still have a week to kind of turn things around before we get to Major 2. I think we skipped over the Gentlemates versus Boston match because we talked about G2 versus Boston. Of course, Boston went 0-2 this week, so Paris, they snapped their losing streak, but this was pretty similar to the G2 series in the sense that Boston could have won this series pretty easily. Like they lose the opening hardpoint 250 to 246. If you remember, they lost 250 244 in that opening hardpoint against G2. Then the S&D is a 6-4 win for Paris. Boston wins the overload 4-2, and then 250 176 hardpoint win for Paris. Yeah, so if you're Boston, this week has to be just incredibly frustrating that you weren't able to pull out either one of these wins when you probably could have swept both of them, in all honesty. And for Paris, this is like probably bittersweet because they did not really have the series that they probably wanted to in that first match of the week. And then against OpTic, they could have maybe won that. They forced it to game 5, but they're able to get a win here against Boston. And I go back to what I said all last week. If Paris had lost this series, they're
yeah,
almost certainly not making it to Major 2. And for this win, it kind of puts their odds, I'm sure, at like 90+% now. Like there's very little chance that they have to, they certainly could lose out and Boston could win
yeah.
out, but like the odds of that happening are pretty slim. So this is a very big win for them in that regard. What did you think?
Huge win, and I do think, end of the day, these were pretty some close maps in here, at least, in terms of coming full circle, talking about Envoy. He had a positive series here with a 1.06, so that's good to see for the Envoy supporters. But Ghosty, 1.56, 95 and 61 in the series overall. Like, that's probably his best statistical performance in a pretty long time. So that's good to see for you and me as Ghosty stands and anyone else in that group. But Yeah, like you said, this was essentially a must-win match for Gentlemates, and they took care of business. So, despite what most people would assume would be a pretty easy match on paper, just given the state of Gentlemates, it was good to actually see them get a win after struggling for a while. Um, but I put in the notes, even despite the loss to OpTic, I think it's pretty inarguable that this was the best Gentlemates have looked since Major One. So that's a good sign for them, at least in terms of potentially turning things around. But another crucial week for them coming up here. Um, in order for them to build on this fully and be able to even like have a shot to defend their title at Major Two.
Yeah, they snapped a 5 match losing streak. They hadn't won since February 21st before then. So, um, like 4 weeks I think had gone by, or 3 weeks had gone by since their last win. In that time, they had lost to C9 Toronto, Minnesota, Vancouver, and OpTic obviously this week, and then they beat Boston. Yeah, again, it was pretty much a must win because of the matches that they have coming down this week. Even though I certainly think that they could beat LAT. But yeah, this was just a really, really necessary match for them, and really for Boston as well. But we just don't think about it like that for them. Like, we go from Major One champion to Boston, who's like always teetering on like 8th or 9th place typically. So we already talked about G2 versus Boston. I think we've touched on Vancouver versus Miami, just because obviously
No,
Miami. I
yeah,
guess yeah, Miami. I said that they went 6-0 this week, so it
okay.
kind of predicts the future here. But they pretty decisively win 250, 199 hard point, 6-2 S&D, 5-2 overload. Any kind of overall like kind of putting a ribbon on the gift for Miami's perfect week.
I honestly do not remember this series at all. So
I
I
mean, who
like
can really blame you?
looking at this, like I can't even remember watching. Like I know I watched it, but I really don't remember it. But I put that in the notes, another Treeks masterclass, and I mean that just full circle with what I was saying earlier. He is pretty much in my eyes right now the leading contender for rookie of the year. Obviously things change with if any rookie eventually somehow gets a championship at some point this year, or some teams just like take massive strides. But 1.42 from Trakes, 1.43 KD from Super, they've really been a pretty dynamic duo and for Miami, at least in this week and in recent performances. So um tough series for Vancouver on the stat sheet, but overall, I just think Miami taking care of business and looking pretty strong. I guess just because they both play Vancouver, it is a little comparable in the sense of um I don't know how to phrase this, but like Toronto playing C9 in Vancouver, Miami plays Falcons in Vancouver. Obviously, you view Miami's slate of matches is a
Mhm.
little more difficult because of Falcons over Cloud9. But in the end, those are probably matches where both teams view them as two winnable matches, because you want to have the mindset of going into these matches like against anyone that you have a shot to beat them. But Miami actually took care of business and solidified a 2-0 week, which, we'll get to the standings, but that has them in second place. And that's a
Mhm.
position, if Toronto won both of their matches, they would have been uh, like just below Miami because they played one more match, but they would have had 6 wins as opposed to 5. And as we've already talked about, the standings are a little jumbled. So just in terms of seeding and stuff for the major, pretty solid showing from Miami this week to take care of business and help their case for having one of the top seeds.
And then the last match on Sunday was FaZe versus Carolina. Of course, Carolina had their win earlier in the week against G2. G2 has had multiple wins over FaZe this season. That did not matter even a little bit here. FaZe, they absolutely rolled them in hardpoint. Pretty decently close S&D 6-4 win for FaZe, and then 5-1 overload for FaZe as well. A 3-0 sweep. Yeah, I don't really know what to say about Carolina. This is just kind of like par for the course for them, that you never really know what you're getting. FaZe, this is a big win for them just because they've
Yeah.
been really struggling lately. Coming into this match, they had lost 4 of their last 5, losing to Minnesota, Falcons, Boston, which is the real hurt one. They beat LAT and then they lost. They got swept by OpTic last week, and then this was their only match this week. So if they had really, waited until the very last match on Sunday and then lost to Carolina and kind of let that linger, I think that would
Yeah.
be a pretty big blow to FaZe. But they're able to win this. How much better did you think that FaZe looked in this match compared to some of the more recent performances that they've had?
I mean, if FaZe lost this match, they would have been 3-6
Yeah,
heading into
must
this final
wins.
stretch. So yeah, so this was a must win as it stood at that point, and they did take care of business. I fully, regardless of the struggles in this qualifiers, I've been vocal about my thoughts on Carolina enough. Like this was a match that FaZe needed to win and needed to show up in, so it was good to see that. Was impressed again by Lurks and kind of full circle. Talked about him in the last Carolina series. Lurks played very well this weekend. Had possibly one of the craziest 1v4s in Call of Duty history. Always want to shout that out. I don't know if we've actually had 1v4s this year yet, so it might have been the first 1v4 of Black Ops 7, but 1v4s don't happen a ton as it is. The fact that he was able to do it in like literally 5 or 6 seconds was just crazy. Like the way it happens, if you didn't see it, definitely go check it out on the COD League Twitter or any of the COD clips pages and stuff. Everyone was posting and stuff. It was absolutely ludicrous. Um, but yeah, that was literally like the one highlight moment in what was otherwise a stomp by FaZe. So it was good to see FaZe come out and take care of business here as you would expect. But definitely want to shout out Lurks for his performance all weekend, uh, even in this losing effort and especially in the 1v4.
And so far, the pick'em with this past week, you went 8-3. I went 7-4. So you're 71-44. I'm 73-42. Your Carolina picks are almost kind of fading into obscurity at this point, or I guess your anti-Carolina picks are kind of fading into obscurity. Standings to this point, heading into the final week of the Major 2 qualifiers, OpTic is 9-0. They have locked up the number 1 seed regardless of what happens this week. They have a 27-7 map count, which is 79%, way higher than anybody else. The Miami Heretics are in second currently. They're 6-3 with a 65% map win percentage. And then there are 3 teams tied at 5-4 currently. The Falcons, LAT, and G2 all have 50 CDL points, all 5-4. So things could happen with the final 2 matches for each of those teams. Toronto also has 5 wins. They have 50 points, but they're 5-5, not 5-4. So they have only 1 match this week. And then there are 3 teams that are tied for 7th. FaZe, Paris, and Carolina. They're all 4-5 heading into the final week. Vancouver I guess Vancouver and Boston both have 3 wins and 30 points, but Vancouver's 3-6, so they could theoretically move ahead of Boston. Boston is 3-7. They are in 11th place and definitely need some help in this final week to make sure that they make it to Major 2. And then Cloud9 New York, despite their win this week, they're 2-7. They have two matches this week, so in theory they could probably get out of the bottom 2, but most likely not. But yeah, they need a lot of help because they can't just win and get in, basically. Yeah, so, but I should say that only 1 seed is locked up. Only OpTic is locked up. I think OpTic is also technically the only team that has actually even qualified for Major 2,
I'd be
because
surprised.
even Miami at 6-3 could still lose their 2 matches and go 6-5, and some crazy tiebreakers could happen. Theoretically, obviously, I don't think that's going to happen. But yeah, there's really no safety in these qualifiers so far, even heading into last week, which I did not really think that was going to happen with 11 matches. I thought for sure that we were going to go in with a lot less of kind of the hype and intrigue into that final week. But now everybody from 2 versus 2 between 12, between 2 and 12, those teams are all separated by 4 or fewer matches, which is pretty crazy to think about when everybody has played at least 9 matches to this point. let's get into these matches, shall we, for next week? So Friday, March 20th, starting off with what could be a banger, but also could be a very disappointing performance by either of these teams, quite honestly. Gentlemates versus FaZe. This is two teams that have really underperformed in the Major 2 qualifiers. If Paris and I guess really they're both fighting to stay out of the bottom two, even with their wins last week. So a loss here could be detrimental to either of them. I'm gonna go with FaZe. I mean, Gentlemates have just been like FaZe has been bad, but Gentlemates have been horrible. So I'll go with FaZe.
All right. I was really thinking you might go with Paris here, and I was going to go with FaZe to be opposite, but I don't know if I can bring myself to pick Gentlemates. I do think there is something to be said about their last week's performance and the fact that they came into the matchup against OpTic with that extra fire. They should, in theory, at least come in with a similar mindset here against FaZe, knowing the situation and knowing they need to show up here. I'm not gonna risk it though. I'm just gonna go with FaZe. I think this is a really interesting matchup to see how it shakes out, and I think it'll probably be one of the matchups we end up spending the most time talking about next episode. Um, but I'll go with FaZe.
Next up, C9 versus Carolina. Gonna go Carolina, even though I certainly could see Cloud9 winning this, but they've only won 2 matches. Both of those we haven't picked them. I think it's hard to predict when they're actually going to show up
Yeah,
and be able to force a game 5 and win those SNDs.
yeah. I gotta end my Carolina embargo for this one and go with them. I can't pick Cloud9 right now, like you said. Just can't rely on it. So I'll take Carolina. I don't feel good about it, but it is what it is.
Next up, Vancouver versus G2. With the way G2 has played, like they could have a letdown, and Vancouver is certainly, I think, better than like post roster change than pre roster change. But also good G2. I think like the ceiling is higher. They've shown more with these respective rosters.
Yeah, I'll take G2 too. I do think, given what we saw from G2 last week, if Vancouver somehow wins this, I wouldn't be super shocked. But I gotta go with G2. I think they're the better team.
Saturday, March 21st, starting with Carolina versus Miami. Certainly got to go with Miami, right? They are on
Yep.
this massive winning streak. Carolina has been hit or miss, so I'm going to go with the Heretics.
Yeah, gotta go Miami here.
FaZe versus C9, same kind of deal. Like they both can have like similar wins, which they do. Like FaZe before this past week had 3 wins, and C9 only has 2 right now. So not too different in the standings, but certainly feel a lot differently about these teams just in general. I will pick FaZe.
Yeah, I'll go with FaZe, and I think it's a good thing, obviously, for them that they've had their struggles, and their last match of the qualifiers is against Cloud9.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it could be a bit of a trap game in terms of if they come into this matchup with that mindset instead of just coming in with that killer mentality of like just like you know putting this team in the dirt. If they come into it with the mindset of like, oh, we have Cloud9 as our last match and kick our feet up and not worry about it, that's where Cloud9 could catch them slipping a little bit. I still obviously expect FaZe to win, but I do think it's a bit of a double-edged sword to have Cloud9 as your last matchup of the qualifiers.
Yeah, I think if FaZe does that, then like something needs to change within the team because none of these matches so far in these qualifiers should make them feel very comfortable with any opponent that they go into or go against because FaZe have lost the majority of their matches and they haven't looked very good even in some of the matches that they've won. So they shouldn't feel comfortable and hopefully they're not overlooking C9 in this match either. Next up is Falcons versus OpTic. Obviously going with OpTic, but I would not be shocked even one bit if the Falcons win this, especially with OpTic saying that they're experimenting, and now that they've like locked up the #1 seed, it's even different than it was even a week ago. I'll go with OpTic, but yeah, Falcons have the talent to do this, and they've pulled off some upsets against some good teams before.
I'll go with OpTic too, and I think OpTic beat them. I'm pretty sure it was literally the first match of the season. If not, it was both of their first matches of the year this year, And
Mm.
then Falcons had that run in the qualifiers, and they ended up playing in the first round of Major 1. And I remember going back and forth about that match and saying, like, maybe Falcons has improved enough to beat OpTic, and OpTic was in a little bit of a slump at that time heading into Major 1. And it didn't matter then. OpTic was able to beat them. First round of Major 1. I'm the way OpTic's been playing, they should beat anybody. So I don't think I think I've already talked more than I needed to about this one. OpTic should win.
Last match on Saturday is LAT versus G2. I will actually go with G2 in this one. LAT have been really bad in S&D. G2, they're pretty kind of coin flippy with the game fives, but I believe in them a little bit more if it did get to a game five. And this just feels like two teams kind of making enough mistakes where this actually does go to a fifth map. So I'll go with G2 Minnesota.
Yeah, this was one match I had as a question mark. I had this match, the Paris versus FaZe match, and then Gentlemate's other match, which we'll get to, were the three that I was kind of going back and forth in my head on in terms of who I was gonna pick here. But then G2's performance last week, I was just kind of like, it is what it is. I'll go with LA Thieves, but both teams had, you know, a little bit of an up and down. Um, Set of series last
Mm-hmm.
week, regardless of the circumstances and who they were playing and whatnot. But I'll take LAT. They're the more talented team on paper. They should be able to win this one, but definitely wouldn't be surprised if G2 pulled it off.
And Sunday, March 22nd, Vancouver versus Falcons. Definitely going to go Falcons here. I mean, I certainly Vancouver can win this. Falcons
Yep.
have played down to their opponents a few times here, but the talent is pretty stark. The difference here, and I think the Falcons will pull this one out.
Yeah, gotta go with Falcons here, I think.
Gentlemates versus LAT. Depending on what happens over the previous few days in these qualifiers or the final week of qualifiers, like this really could be a super consequential match. Certainly, Boston has to win their match on Sunday to really make both Cloud9 and Boston both have to win to really make this into something. But if they do, then who knows? Gentlemates could be in danger of missing out on Major 2. I will go with LAT here. I think like it kind of just shows how I feel about some of these teams currently is that I'm picking G2 over LAT and LAT
Yeah.
over Paris, the defending Major 1 champions. But yeah, Paris have just given me nothing to really feel good about. Even their win this past week wasn't very convincing and definitely felt like they could have lost that. And I just don't trust them at all at this point. So I'm going to go with LAT.
I gotta go with Gentlemates here, and it's simply not even thinking of recent matchups, just thinking of how much Ghosty has owned
Yeah,
the
it's true.
LAT matchup here since the off season moves. So I'm banking on that a little bit here to go with Gentlemates, but definitely another match I am super looking forward to. We've already talked plenty about how this is a tough stretch for Gentlemates down the stretch for their last few matches of these qualifiers, and these are going to be two very telling matches uh, for Gentlemates up against FaZe and LAT in terms of what we get out of them at Major 2, if they're even at it.
Yeah. Next up was Miami versus Boston. Like I said, Boston actually has to win this match to force a tiebreaker for anything above 11th place. So literally is must win for them to not miss Major 2. I think they're going to miss Major 2. I think they're going to lose this to Miami. And if that is the case, Heretics has a really good shot. If they beat Carolina and they beat Boston, then they finish the Major 2 qualifiers on a 7-match win streak, which
Yeah.
they started 1-3, they finished 8-3, very similar to how the Falcons and Carolina, I guess, also finished the Major 1 qualifiers. That's not a great omen for how they might do at Major 2, but it would lock up the second seed and give them a lot of momentum going into the Major. I will go with the Heretics here.
Yeah, gotta go Miami.
Toronto versus OpTic. There's no way I can pick against OpTic. It feels weird to actually predict that they will go 11-0. That is pretty crazy to think about. But I don't know, like Toronto just not inspiring a lot of confidence.
I just think it would be really funny. I think I said it last episode. If I didn't, maybe it was 2 episodes ago. But if OpTic go 11-0 in the Major 2 qualifiers in 2026 after the 0-18 debacle in the 2025 Major 2 qualifiers, that's literally just like two complete opposite ends of the spectrum there. So I think that's kind of funny, but I do think it is notable here that the maps that we had JP discuss were Blackheart and Den for the maps that OpTic would want to test. So does OpTic view this as an opportunity to be like, we have a shot to get a Den rep against possibly the best team on Den right now, or are they just going to be like, yeah, we're not going to risk it. We'll try out Blackheart against them, but not Den. So I think that will be interesting to see how that shakes out. But regardless of what the vetoes look like, Optics should absolutely 100% win this matchup.
Yeah, Toronto is 0-3 on Blackheart Hardpoint, so who knows if they want to play it and they're thinking about their
Yeah,
seeding, and it's like, actually, we would rather play, like, I mean, play Den and Scar if you want to do it, and then Optics like, all right, that sounds good to us. Like, yeah, Scar's a comfort pick for us as well. So, yeah, it'll be interesting. We'll obviously talk about all the matches on our next show. Please like, subscribe, follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube. I checked before the show. We were at 289 subscribers on YouTube. So hopefully we can get to 300 subscribers relatively soon. You can follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Presbyers, and the podcast stores at Ego Chall Podcast. If you want to watch the show live, you can do so on either YouTube or you can go to twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. You can follow us and subscribe there. You can also follow and subscribe to Bink at jbink or at twitch.tv/jbink with 2Ks. And the next show, hopefully, will be on Sunday night after the matches conclude. So we'll get a complete lay of the land and who's going to Major 2, who is not, what the seeds are, and all of that good stuff. So hopefully around 9 p.m. or so Eastern on Sunday, we'll be here either on YouTube or Twitch. Breaking it all down and talking about some of the implications that we've been kind of setting up, but haven't been able to realize so far. I think that about does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yep. Thank you guys, as always, for all the support and everything. Shout out to all the guys who were in the YouTube chat earlier. Rickus Morty. I got to do some scrolling because Rickus Morty was typing a lot. Eve, JJ Wody, he's been another staple in the chat recently. I don't think I missed anybody, but shout out to anybody who's stopping by and chatting in the YouTube. Always appreciate that. But yeah, should be back on Sunday. I guess we will have to see. March Madness kicks off tomorrow, so might be some scheduling stuff around that depending on what's going on there. But it doesn't even it's crazy for me. I'm in a weird spot. Like I'm excited for March Madness, but it feels like it's not even like actually happening when it's happening tomorrow. And obviously the first couple days are the craziest. So those are my favorite. But we got that. We got baseball officially kicking off in a week too. So a lot of stuff going on. But at least in the Call of Duty perspective, one more week of online qualifiers, then we're back to LAN, and we'll be here to break it all down for you and discuss everything. So appreciate the support. Thank you all for stopping by and all the love, and should see you on the next one. So until then, remember to send the chow.